think for me, the most important thing was to be passionate about it, which kind of seems like a cop-out answer, but I think the most important thing is to have that internal drive to make it, because if you don't have the drive, you're not going to make it.
Hello, fellow Webtoon fans and creators. I'm Audrey, and this is the Webtoon Wave podcast. Today, I have a really awesome guest. They are the creator of the Prince of Southland on Webtoon. Please welcome Chris. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I am just so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And I hadn't read the Prince of Southland until you had applied to be on the podcast. And so I started reading it. I'm like, where has this been? How could I have not read this before? So
yeah,
I'm just excited.
It gets hidden a little bit sometimes, but yeah.
It should get promoted more. Like, it's too good to not get all the promotion. Come on, Webtoon.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's just get into it. For those listeners that don't know you or haven't read The Prince of Southland, give us an introduction to you and how you got into webcomics.
So for me, comics has kind of always been a part of my life. I've been drawing since I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And I've always loved watching movies. And I think what really spurred me on was the first Spider-Man movie. I got really into comics after that. Yeah, I was obsessed with that movie. And I still like Spider-Man. But yeah, after that I started reading graphic novels. I read Watchmen and Scott Pilgrim. And a little later, in college, I got into anime and manga.
Nice.
And that's when I really started to get obsessed with sci-fi. I watched this one anime called Psycho-Pass, which really really influenced me and inspired this comic in particular. And I've always read comics too. I don't know if you are familiar with Smack Jeeves, but that was
oh my gosh,
way back in the day.
Throwback. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I read so many different comics on there. And yeah, I think I always knew I wanted to make a comic, but I just never had the ability or drive to sit down and do it until later. It's funny because I had the story for the Prince of Southland for many, many years. My characters I've had since I was in middle school, which is embarrassing to say, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the actual plot, I first tried to make it into a novel because I didn't think my art was good enough to make it into a comic. Yeah, because I always wanted it to be a comic, but I was like, I'm not there yet. I can't do it. So I wrote this entire novel, and I pitched it. I queried it, and I did actually get a couple agents interested, but
oh wow,
I kind of fell off of it. And then sometime around 2018 or 19, I got really into drawing again, and that's when I found Webtoon. So I was reading all the Webtoons on there and getting inspired, and I was like, oh, I could definitely do this. So I just rewrote the novel in a comic script format and just did the first couple chapters and posted it on Canvas. And that's when I think I had only been posting for maybe 3 months on Canvas before they reached out for the originals contract. So
yeah,
it wasn't very long, but
no, that's amazing. Well, clearly they recognize just how amazing the story is and how talented you are. So that's definitely got to feel validating, especially it being your first comic.
Yeah, I had tried other comics in the past, but it was always I never got past the first chapter. So I always scrapped them. So this is my first one I've actually gone into it significantly.
Was it challenging moving it from a written like book format to like a script, or was it kind of easy?
No, it was very hard. It's funny because I sent like when I got the originals contract, I spoke with Bree Boswell.
I,
She's my main editor, and she was the one who was handling the contract and everything with me. She was like, "Okay, let's figure out like what we want to do for the first, how are we starting it and what's your story and all of that." So, and then I sent her this like massive like 30-page outline. It
oh,
was like way too much information.
oh
She's
my
like, "Okay,
goodness.
let's pare it back a little bit."
Yeah.
And yeah, so that clearly it was like too much. I like overplotted it at first because of like taking it from a novel to a comic. I like overdid it, I think.
Mm.
Which it's funny now because I went to the complete opposite end of the spectrum because now I'm very much a pantser and I kind of just write a sentence or two for an entire episode and then figure it out as I go.
What was your feeling when she reached out to you back in the day? Were you just like,
Yeah, no, I was thrilled. It happened like right at the start of COVID. It was because I posted, I think, in January of 2020. And then I think she reached out in March, like right, I think it was like the same week that lockdown started, which was funny.
yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, I actually could maybe make this work because I still had my day job, but I was like, oh, I could, since I'm working from home, I thought it was going to last like a few weeks. It's like, oh, I'll make it work. So anyway, that's kind of how it started. But yeah, I was thrilled. That's what I had wanted when I first posted to Canvas.
Yeah. Did you ever expect that it would happen to you? Like, did you expect like, oh yeah, this is definitely gonna work out for me?
I had hoped for it. I thought I was good enough, which sounds really conceited, but I did. I was like, yeah, I can do it. So I just didn't expect it to happen quite so soon. I was expecting like having to do a year of updates and then maybe they'd reach
Mm.
out.
It's interesting that like it happens for people at like different stages. With you, it happened pretty quickly. With Rotania, she had been publishing for like 4 years. She did really
Yeah.
well in the call to action contest, but they didn't reach out to her until she started Starcatcher. Like you never know when an opportunity could come down the pipeline.
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with the timing of it because Webtoon was really blowing up in
Yeah,
2019 and 2020. So I think they were just taking on way more people around that time,
yeah, yeah.
which sucks for people now because they're really not getting as many original creators now, I think. But I think I just got lucky, honestly.
I mean, timing, yeah. Like 2020 definitely felt like kind of I wouldn't say we're not still in like the golden age, but like the golden age of Webtoon, like, because everyone's home. Some people
Yeah.
aren't even working and they discover Webtoon. So, yeah, they, definitely blew up during that time. And
Mhm.
that's like when a lot of creators that I've talked to or I'm mutuals with that like got contracts. Yeah, so it's just kind of interesting. But again, you never know if something will come down the line like soon or
Yeah.
years from this point.
And I always told myself, like, regardless of if people actually read it or if I get any subscribers or if I get an originals contract, like, I'm still going to post it. I'm still going to make this thing. Like, I was really strict with myself. Like, I'm going to be posting on a schedule just for my own sake, because I wanted to actually finish a comic.
Um, how often were you posting?
I believe it was weekly, I think. But I got up to probably 10, 11, 12 episodes, something like that.
How long do you think those episodes were at the time?
Oh my god. I couldn't even tell you. I think they were maybe because I was doing it in a page format and not
Mm,
scroll format. I think it
yeah.
was 4 pages per episode.
Okay. Yes, that's a decent length actually. Like if you're, yeah, yeah. So for the people listening that haven't read Prince of Southland or heard of it, can you give us a synopsis of the story?
So, Prince of Southland is a sci fi queer romance. It's about a cyborg celebrity named Donnie who falls in love with an android fugitive named Jensen. And it's basically they're in a society where relationships between androids and humans are illegal. So it's all about uh, all the struggles with that. There's lots of themes of queerness and trauma, and a lot of questions about morality and the law and crime and what it means to be human.
That is a great elevator pitch. I yeah, I remember when I had sat down and started reading it, I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like I love how unique the setting is. I love queer romances and I feel like I don't read enough sci-fi. And so when I started reading it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I need to read more sci-fi webtoons." But yeah, I just love how unique the premise is and like the overall theme. It's kind of interesting. The story is about more than just like uh them falling in love and one of them is a android and the other human, right? So or even like cyborg.
I was just going to say, I wanted it to kind of not be a romance first. I always liked stories that were action or fantasy or something else first, and then the romance is kind of weaved throughout. So that was kind of my goal, even though I think on Webtoon it's categorized as a romance, but for me, I consider it sci fi first.
So how did you come up with the story? Like, because I know you're saying like you were inspired by like sci-fi, like anime and manga, but like how did you come up with like the story itself?
Yeah, a lot of anime was inspiring me. Besides Psychopaths, like Akira and Paprika and Ghost in the Shell and Full Metal Alchemist was a huge inspiration. Full Metal Alchemist is like my favorite anime of all time. So both of
The
them, not
both of
just
them? Okay.
yeah, no, I love both of them. I think Brotherhood is a little bit more my favorite, but I enjoy watching both. Um, they're good in their own ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. I like Brotherhood a lot more. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
But yeah, just taking a lot of the themes in those that I really resonated with, like with Psychopaths, it's a lot about like society versus like the main characters, and I just really wanted something that also played with that. So kind of like societal expectations and like what's considered quote unquote normal, which is something I have personally struggled with a lot in my life as a queer person. Um, so yeah, just trying to carry that message through the plot in some way that's interesting and different than I've seen before. While also having like fun, you know, steamy romance, which is what I like to read. So
Yeah. Totally here for it. So, what did you do in like the early stages of pre-production? Like, how was it moving from the Canvas version to the originals version?
it was a big transition. Like I said, for Canvas, I was working in a page format, and I had a very long and complicated outline. Um, so when I started with originals, Brie was kind of like, okay, we need to overhaul this entire story. And like, your story's really good, but we need to rearrange everything. And I actually ended up moving a major plot point from the beginning of the story to the end of season one, which is
Oh,
spoiler
wow.
spoiler alert. It's that Jensen is an android. I was originally starting the story with that, but she was like, "Oh, it would be a much bigger impact if we end season one with it." So
She was on the money with that one.
yeah, no, she knows what she's talking about.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So that just like the rewriting and the rearranging of things was kind of a challenge. And then also just learning the scroll format was something I had never done before. So yeah, that was its own thing as well.
Yeah.
Uh, as well as like the deadlines, just trying to keep up or at least get to a point where I could keep up with weekly episodes. That took me several months to get to that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely a lot of work because you want to have a certain amount of buffer episodes, right?
Yeah, I okay, so I got the contract in March. I don't think I signed until like June. And then uh I started drawing in August of 2020, and then I didn't actually launch until March of the following year. So that's how long
Mm,
it took.
yeah. And how many episodes did you have to have done?
Uh there's no set number. They kind of just tell you whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay.
I believe I had 12. I think I had 12 when I started. Which looking back is probably not enough. If I could do it over again, I would have like 20 probably. Each episode of Buffer is a week off that you can take in the year coming up. So, like
True.
how many weeks off do you want?
Yeah, especially if you're doing like a 50 something episode season.
Yeah, it's a year.
So, what were you thinking the reception would be on The Prince of Southland? Were you like what were your feelings about it?
Um it's funny. I was extremely nervous for launch. I had I mean, I have a lot of anxiety in general, so that's probably didn't help, but um I had never really had a platform that was quite so large. So yeah, just being afraid of comments and what people are going to say and like people nitpicking things. And honestly, overall, I think the reception was really good. I don't think there was any reason for me to be quite so anxious about it. I have a really loyal readership and fan base, so I'm very appreciative of them. I don't have the biggest fan base, but I think it's almost better when you have like a smaller group of people who's super loyal and dedicated and super into the story. It just makes it so much better.
I would agree with that, like having a smaller audience that are just more like involved and excited about the story is better than having like a big audience, but there's like not that many people in comparison that are like reading the story.
Yeah, I mean, not that having a big audience is bad. I think anyone would
No.
love to have a big audience, but there's something to be said for having a small but devoted fan base.
So how was it like pitching the series to at Webtoon? Were you like really nervous about the feedback that they would have for it?
So I wasn't really that involved with when Bree did the pitch to the rest of Webtoon.
Yeah.
Um I had to draw the first three episodes and or I had to sketch it. So there's like a sketch
Yeah.
thumbnails and then she presented that as the pitch. I don't remember being nervous about it at all. I think I thought because Brie had already signed off on it and she was already doing so many different successful series that I was
Yeah.
like, okay, if she likes it, then I'm probably good. So
Yeah, yeah. So when you were creating the story and you were thinking of the characters, like you already had the characters figured out before the main plot, right?
it was kind of a back and forth. I had these characters or most of them for like a long time and I knew like their quirks and their personalities, but as far as like the plot related things, I didn't have until I had the plot first. So, like for example, I had Donnie as a character, but I didn't have him as a cyborg before, which is funny because it's such a important part of his character now. But I think before I just kind of had them as these like vague ideas of OCs, as you do. And then but when I got the plot down, then I was like, "Oh, this is why he acts like this. This is why, you know, just all these little things." It was like a puzzle piece fitting everything
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
So when you're creating the story, did you have like Because you said you already had it written, but moving it from like a written book to a webtoon format, like did you have to take a lot of stuff out? Did you have to condense it a lot? Like what was that like?
Yeah, there was a lot of pacing changes. I I originally did not leave enough space for romance. I was very much sci-fi and plot forward, and then Brie was like, "No, you gotta slow it down. You gotta add more romance, make people really, really root for them." Yeah, so I had to basically cut the first third of the story in half, and so that first half of the third is season one, um, which is not actually like not that much actually happens, but it's just their relationship. Um, and then season two is when the plot stuff happens, so it's there a lot more time passes then, but yeah, so it was just like a shuffling around and rearranging of things.
Yeah. Well, I really do like that we get a lot more introduction and like time with them to like establish their relationship in the story. Like, cause I am like a character driven person. I love stories that are driven by the characters themselves. So I like really appreciated that that's like the
Yeah,
direction it went.
yeah, I think that was definitely the right move. I think I had tunnel vision a little bit, so yeah, it's good to spend some time with the characters and the setting, and because it's my story is not an easy one to understand, especially if you're not familiar with sci-fi tropes
Yeah.
to begin with. So slowing down really helps new readers, I think, understand the story as well.
And what are some of like your favorite tropes that you were like, I have to include this trope in the comic?
Well, the main one that is the reason I made the comic is forbidden love. I just love a good forbidden love story. Um, One of my favorite uh, movies slash plays growing up was Phantom of the Opera. So I love
Yes.
like, and I always wanted the Phantom to get with Christine in the
We
end. So
all
it,
did.
yeah, so just like that, like forbidden, like everybody's against you kind of thing has always been interesting to me. So that's kind of what I built the whole thing around. But besides that, I really love found family tropes. Um, Love a good enemies to lovers. I don't, I don't think my comic is quite enemies to lovers. It's kind of like frenemies to lovers, or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So that one's fun. And then of course like the forced proximity, and then they were roommates kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Love it.
yeah, that one that's a big one. Trying to think if there was any other ones. Oh, like the grumpy sunshine dynamic. I love that.
Yeah.
And then just like be gay, do crime, like just classic.
Yeah.
Like, us against the world kind of thing.
I am a big fan of like all those tropes, so it's like no wonder I immediately fell in love with the Prince of Southland. I was like, yes,
Just perfect.
it has everything. So, when you were kind of in this process of, shifting things around for the story, figuring out the plot, what was kind of your strategy working on those first three episodes? Because, like in Webtoon, your first three episodes are emphasized as the most important. So, what was your thought process with those?
So for me, the first three episodes, I have my two main characters I have to introduce, and I can't just introduce them. I have to get people to like them.
Yeah.
And then I have to show that they belong together. So that was like the goal for each of the three. Like episode one is introducing Donnie, and why do you care about him? Episode two is introducing Jensen, why do you care about him? And then episode three is why do they belong together? Um, so it was, and then of course, besides that, you have to introduce the plot and the world and you know, all the foreshadowing to future events. So I think that's where me having done it as a novel in the first place helped me, because I already knew these major key plot points that were coming down the line. so I could foreshadow them, especially in those first 3 episodes. But yeah, that was kind of the main goal while I was making it. And I had a lot of help from Bree. She kind of like really, really led me on those first 3, which was immensely helpful.
She's incredibly knowledgeable about just how to set up the story and like what you should really like focus on.
Yeah, she had me redo a lot of it many times over. That's why it took from like it was like June to August before I could have the pitch meeting, because that took me that long to get the first 3 episodes to a
Yeah.
place where it was good.
Yeah.
She was all about the hooks, which I knew that you needed a good hook, but I just wasn't like I hadn't gotten to the point where it was big enough yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of it was just reworking the hooks and figuring out what is going to get people to really want to read the rest of it.
Yeah. And I feel like it's so important, but also like the hardest thing to figure out when making a webtoon is like, how are you going to hook readers? How do you introduce the characters? How do you introduce the world? And how do you like set up readers' expectations for the rest
Yeah.
of the story in 3 episodes?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think the first 2 ended up being like 90 panels long or
Oh my
something.
gosh.
They're very long. And my like goal for each episode is 45, so it was like double.
Oh, it makes sense that the first 3 are going to be the longest, or even
Yeah.
like the first 5, because like you're just setting everything up. So they're
Yeah.
usually longer, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to, like, I really want to talk about the art of the comic. I just absolutely adore just like how scrumptious your art style is. Like the
Thank
color
you.
palettes are just so vibrant and they play well together, and the environments you built. Like I'm just like what's your thought process when you're composing your panels, like that storyboarding, sketching process?
Yeah. It's always changing for me, but I'm very inspired by movies and cinema. Obviously, since I listed all those movies that inspired me, but I'm always looking at the cinematography of these different films, as well as like the colors they use, and especially older films. Like I'm a huge fan of 80s stuff, which probably comes through, but just the colors in the 80s movies was just completely different than they do now,
Oh,
and I just am obsessed with it. But so I look at a lot of inspiration first, uh, either from movies, or I also have like Pinterest boards of just like illustrations and screen caps and stuff from anime and literally any kind of media that you can think of, that I like. And that's kind of an ongoing thing for me. I'm always looking for inspiration and always saving it if it looks good. I'm like,
yeah.
oh, this is so good. I got to do something like this. So just always saving it. So I'll definitely start any like important panel by going through my Pinterest boards and seeing what looks good and how I want it to feel. Um, and a lot of the color story has to do with feeling, I think. If there's like a moment where it's like super tense or like something horrible is about to happen, like I want the colors to say that, right? So
Oh yeah. Hmm.
like I'll use a lot of greens for like uncomfortable situations because it just feels like ugh, like
Yeah,
you
like
know.
eerie, like ooh.
Yeah, and then like pinks and purples are more like calmer and more like kind of like lovey-dovey scenes are more pink. And then the blue is kind of like very has to do with the androids. So every like android scene, or a lot of them, have the like neon teal blue lighting. So there's a lot of symbolism in it, but I also just do what I feel like looks good. I'm kind of a slave to the rule of cool. I just make what I like, and at the end of the day, I just want it to look cool.
Yeah, well, it certainly does. Like every, I swear, every panel, I'm just like, ooh, that's a nice panel. Oh, I love this panel. So how do you kind of balance which panels need more time or more emphasis or take up more space than others? Because like you can't have every panel be like a gorgeous cinematic detailed piece. So how do you like balance which ones need that time?
It's definitely like which are the most important moments. So if it's like a really like like if someone is confessing something, or it's like a like when Jensen first says like I love you and stuff like that, it's like I'm gonna definitely spend like 4 times as much time on those ones. Also ones that are like introducing a new setting, I try to spend a lot more time on, just because this is like the first impression of this new place. I want readers to really get a feel for what it is and what it feels like to be there. Especially since for most of my backgrounds, I just do like a blur filter on everything. So it's just colors blurred for like 90% of the backgrounds. So
Convenient.
for like the establishing shots, I really want them to be detailed to kind of like compensate for that, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, it's good because in that establishing shot, you set up where your characters are and like what the environment they're in, and then just blur the backgrounds, boom. And like you
Yeah.
have enough context in the beginning to not have to be like, oh, wait, where are they in the scene? Yeah.
And I also think the lighting kind of lets me get away with more, because you could have them on a white background, but if the lighting's the same, then you can tell they're in the same
Right.
location. Or a lot of times I will change the lighting when there's a scene change. So it's like the same panel, just different lighting. So you can tell that it's like some time has passed or whatever. So I use it in that way too.
Yeah. Work smarter, not harder, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Especially when you like you have your deadlines and you have a specific like panel minimum that you have to hit every week. It's like you got to find those ways to be more economical with it.
Yeah, I am all for shortcuts and cheating and every possible resource you could use
Yeah.
to make webtoons making faster.
What are some of your favorite shortcuts or like cheats?
I use a lot of 3D models for my backgrounds. I got really good at SketchUp in the past couple years, so I've actually started making my own models.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
Takes a long time in the beginning, but
Yeah.
once it's done, and then I can just use it forever. So that helps a lot. Um, if I'm not sure how far you've gotten, but if you see the scenes that take place in the underside, I started with a model, and then I just like built upon it and built upon it and built.
Oh, wow.
So there's just like stacks of buildings and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That is so cool because like I do use SketchUp for my backgrounds, but I have not learned how to like make anything myself. So mad respect that you can like add upon or even like make your own
To be fair,
assets.
I did go to art school, and they did teach me SketchUp there. So
Oh,
I
that's
am
convenient.
fine. But I'm sure there's like tutorials online and stuff. I'm sure it's not like that much different than taking a proper class. But it does take time.
Yeah. Yeah, it does take time and SketchUp is expensive.
Yeah, that is true. It is.
Yeah.
It always hits my wallet when I have to pay that yearly.
Oh my gosh, that yearly fee, man. So, I get questions a lot, like in my DMs, comments, whatever. People are like, "How do I start a webtoon? Like, what program should I use?" And I'm like, I don't have the time to like sit and like walk you through it, but what are some of your like best tips for beginners? Where should they start? What should be like the most important things for them to focus on?
I think for me, the most important thing was to be passionate about it, which kind of seems like a cop-out answer, but
No.
I think the most important thing is to have that internal drive to make it. Because if you don't have the drive, you're not going to make it. So you have to make a story that you care about and that you're passionate about. If you're just doing something because it's trendy or because you were told to do it, then it's just not going to last. I also think that it shows in the work, whether you're passionate about it or not. So I think the best webtoons are the ones that people have kind of like pour their heart and soul into it, regardless of whether people are going to read it or not.
I tell that to people all the time because like I see this question a lot too, like not just to like direct it at me in particular, but like even like on Reddit where people are like, would you read a webtoon
Yeah.
in this style? Would you read a webtoon with this plot? And it's like,
I
who
always say
cares
that
if
on
we
Reddit.
would read it? Go
Yeah.
make something that you yourself are like passionate about. Like what would you read if you were looking for a webtoon? Like what is the webtoon that you'd be like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
crazy about this?
I made something that I want to read. Like this is what I
Exactly.
care about.
Well, yeah, because if you're only making it because you think other people will like it, then you'll eventually just, like you said, lose passion for it and just not want to do it.
Yeah, and I think it can also come across as a bit soulless. Like, yeah, if your heart's not in it, I think it shows through.
Yeah, definitely. Like some of, again, like I would agree with you to reiterate your point, is some of the best webtoons out there that I've read are also like people who are just insanely passionate about their story and it shines through. And then I get more invested into the story because I'm like, the creators loves it. I can see how much work they put into it, and so it just makes me happy and want to like keep reading it too. So, what about maybe art in like the art realm of it? Because people are like, you struggle with this in the beginning too. It's like, oh, I feel like my art isn't good enough to start a comic. So, what would you tell somebody who's maybe in that headspace right now?
I would say to make it anyway, which I think every webtoon creator would say.
Yeah.
Because your art's going to improve anyway, you might as well start now, and then you have a baseline. Uh, you
Yeah.
can't, yeah, you can't just wait until you're better because you're always going to be able to get better. So it's just like you're constantly moving the goalpost. So
Yeah.
if you have an idea and you're passionate about it, just make it, whether you have the skills or not. I wish I had started sooner. I started way too late. I could have done it like 4 years before, but I didn't because I was not confident in my art.
And it's like, and I see this all the time, like even with my mutuals, I see them continuously posting art or posting their webtoons, and it's crazy how fast people improve just by working on a webtoon. Like their skills just skyrocket, basically. I've seen like so many mutuals of mine just like improve like a crazy amount. So if anybody's like, oh, I don't feel like my art's good enough, I'm like, your art will improve as you make it.
Yeah, that you can't be making like hundreds of drawings a month without getting better.
True. It's like the grind. Oh my gosh, the grind, man. Yeah, I think like because I kind of dealt with that too for a long time. We were kind of like in the same timeline. Like I discovered Webtoon in like 2018, was reading a bunch, and then at some point down the line, I was like, oh man, I really want to do like what these people do. And for the longest time, I didn't even attempt it because I'm like, I don't know how to draw. I had some classes in college, but it wasn't like anything that I like made a hobby out of or like pursued beyond the classroom. So yeah, so I'm like, ah man, I wish I would have started sooner too.
Yeah. And I feel like if you have some kind of writing skills, you can still make a comic even without the art skills because
Yeah.
people literally make stick figure comics that are good. So it's just, yeah.
I think the most important thing is the story. Like I think to some degree, like, art does attract people to like click, but the story is gonna keep them invested.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's hard to read a story that's really bad, but even though the art is really good, it's like there's so many webtoons I've read that the art is like god tier, but I can't get invested in the story, and so I just don't stick around.
Yeah, the story, I mean, the purpose of a comic is the story, right? It's just a visual storytelling medium. But yeah, you got to have the story there, even if the art isn't.
Yeah. And I don't know if you also deal with this, but it's hard to not be a perfectionist as well. And so I get stuck, and plenty of people, we all get stuck on like little details and like making sure a panel looks perfect. And like if you've dealt with that, like
No, I've definitely dealt with that. I especially in the beginning, it was hard to let go and just let a panel be bad. Like I said, it's visual storytelling. So the point is to tell the story. It's okay if not every panel is perfect. In fact, I think it's good to have a few panels that are bad. It just helps you let go and keep moving forward and keep that momentum. I always try to prioritize my panels for each episode. So I have certain ones that are like, okay, I'm going to really spend time on it. I'm going to make this one look really good. And then all the other ones, I'm like, okay, just go as fast as possible. If it doesn't look anatomically correct, it's fine. Like if I just need to like scribble in the back, it's fine. Like just as long as people understand what the story is, and it's fine.
Yeah. And I feel like once people get invested in the story, they're not going to care so much about like the art, especially like because most people I don't even think are paying attention to the art quality. They just want to like read the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, and each person spends like zero point 0.3 seconds on every panel. So that also helps me. I'm just like, nobody's
Yeah.
looking at this for a long time.
Well, it's also kind of got to be hard, especially if you do have a large audience, that to not feel the pressure of like, oh my gosh, I have so many eyes on this comic now. Things have to like look really good.
Yeah, I for that reason I don't look at comments anymore. Um,
Yeah.
I will get some people messaging me and saying, "Did you know you forgot this on this panel?" I'm like,
Oh no.
I get that a lot actually, but
Oh,
I
my
normally
nightmare.
just ignore it or delete it. I'm just like, yeah, I know, just let me live. Like,
Just let me live. It's too
yeah,
late now.
usually those are like I think younger readers, so I try not to be take it personally. It's just
Yeah.
yeah, people are just noticing things.
See, that's like, it's funny because I'll be like working on an episode and then I'll post it and then I'm reading through it. I'm like, oh my gosh, there is a spelling error.
Yeah,
There's continuity error. And I'm like, hopefully nobody
yeah.
notices.
I get a lot of typos actually because I'm fucking ADHD, so I'm constantly going like so fast, and especially with the typing, I just type everything myself. So
Yeah.
yeah, I get a lot of typos.
Yeah. I mean, the typos don't usually like take me out of the story. Uh, Sometimes I'll like giggle at it if it's like really bad, but like, some people can be like really mean about it though. Like,
Oh
oh my
yeah.
gosh, how unprofessional. Like,
I mean, to be clear, I will go and fix typos, but it just happens very often for me. Usually it's after the episode is out because that's when people tell me. So
okay, we covered your favorite webtoon tropes, but I'm really curious what you're like, and not just like webtoon, but like what are your least favorite tropes that really just like bug you?
I really dislike a love triangle that's not actually a triangle.
It's
It's
like a
like
love corner.
a V.
Like a
I hate that. I want it to be a real love triangle or not at all. Like commit
love.
to it. Yeah, that annoys me. Anything with like super overt gender roles really bothers me. Like super macho man who is just a stereotypical macho man, or like a super like cutesy like helpless girl lead or whatever. It's just like not. I don't know. That's not like real people.
Yeah.
It bothers me.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm the same way.
yeah, and then I really hate when homophobia is like the number one
Oh,
plot point. Like you can have it in your story, but don't make it like the main like conflict. That bothers me. I mean, obviously there's a place for those kinds of stories. I just don't really want to read about them. Yeah. And then the other one that really bothers me is like miscommunication tropes.
oh.
Like like you can't just talk to each other. Like
I think people put those in there to create conflict, but it's like an artificial form of conflict. I feel like it's so frustrating from a reader's perspective to like constantly have the miscommunication. Like just talk to each other.
it it feels like a cop out because like you could have an actual conflict. Like what if they disagree? Like the characters are disagreeing on this, or it's I don't know, it just feels like you took the easy way out for to have them not actually communicate with each other.
Yeah. And it gets harder to connect with the characters when that happens and
Yeah,
like
because it just
stay
seems
in
like
the
they're
story.
stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, I see people complain about that all the time. Like, oh, you're tired of the miscommunication tropes, and half of the story would have just been taken away if you didn't have like the miscommunication.
That one's really, I feel like that's always happens in romance. Like that's like a classic romance trope.
I feel like for people who are like hearing this and oh no, I have miscommunication tropes in my comic. Am I a bad writer? I don't think that makes you a bad writer. Um, I think, like they're very common in romance stories to have miscommunication. And it's not to say that characters can't have miscommunication, because it just like in real life that happens. But don't just drag it out for like episode after episode after episode or like a whole season, because that's when it gets like too much, you know?
It's also just
Well,
like do it in a way that feels realistic, you
right.
know?
Yeah. And I like, having more realistic characters and like situations just helps you stay invested in the story and like be interested in the characters and like connect with them on some level, right?
Hmm.
What are some of your favorite webtoons, and which ones would you say are like a really good example of like good art and good storytelling?
My favorite webtoon is called Air's Game by Suspu. It's a queer romance action webtoon. It's complete. It's very good. Highly recommend for art and story. Actually, I think the story is like top tier. I go back to it and reread it a lot. Um, it's also just a very good example of a queer romance where the romance is not like the first, like the forefront of the story. There's other
Yeah.
stuff happening. Um, and then besides that, I really like Castle Swimmer by Wendy Lan Martin. I think everybody knows that one. But her art is just gorgeous and the story is really well done. Um, what else? Oh, I really love Time and Time Again, which
Mm.
is a supernatural queer romance about werewolves and vampires and time travel. So that one's really fun
Oh.
and super. Yeah, and I love the art style. It's very different and super clean and satisfying to look at, and the
Mm.
story is really interesting.
Well, I'm
And then
definitely
the
adding
last
that
one I
one.
wanted to mention, yeah, yeah, you should. It's super good. Um, the last one I have was "It Strikes a Chord" by Spring Groove. It's a modern romance, queer romance. So yeah, super fun.
Well, I'll definitely add those to my list. I mean, not that I didn't have Castle Swimmer on my list,
Yeah,
but yeah, I think there's something to be said where like if people want to improve or get inspiration, just read a bunch of webtoons. Doesn't have to be
exactly. Yeah.
originals either. Go to Canvas,
Yep.
go to Tapas, go to wherever. Just find inspiration. So, before we wrap up, what are some things that you wish you knew in the beginning when you just first started working on The Prince of Southland?
I think the main thing is be okay with being bad. I'm like such a perfectionist and it's very hard to let go and post something, especially where a lot of people are going to see it when you think it's not your best work. But I think that's kind of the nature of comics. You have to not be afraid to post something that isn't perfect just because the most important thing is keeping the schedule and keeping up with the deadlines. So that's one thing I would say, to not be afraid of being cringe
Hmm.
because I think a lot of a lot of people online are like, don't be cringe, all that. And I think posting something that you've made that is in a comic format is inherently like vulnerable, and being vulnerable it can be feel like you're being cringe a lot of the time, and I think that's okay. Like just be okay with being cringe and you'll feel so much better about everything.
Yeah, just kind of like let go of the pressure of like oh I can't do this. This is going to be too cringy. This isn't going to be something that people will like.
Yeah. Or like feeling like it's because you're putting yourself out there, right? When you're making something, and you're always afraid that someone's going to be like, oh, that's stupid or whatever. So just know that it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. And just embrace being cringe.
Yeah, just do it because you love doing it. And, like you said, you put something out there and people are going to say whatever, but don't let that stop you from making a story that you love.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Chris, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It was such an honor to talk to you and get to know more about you and your process.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, I will include Chris's links in our show notes. You can go follow them on Instagram. You can go read The Prince of Southland on Webtoon. It is amazing. It is beautiful, and it gives me all the warm, fuzzy feelings. So if you found this podcast entertaining or informative, give us a like, give us a follow. You can find us on our socials at the Webtoon Wave. You can listen to us on Spotify. You can find us on YouTube and watch our videos. You can keep up with us on Instagram, get all news and updates on future guests and cool Webtoon content. So stay creative, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time.